Hi everyone, I'm Megan, and I'm 28 years old. I'm here to share a story with you today, a story that started with what felt like a simple, terrible night out, but quickly unraveled into something much bigger and much more painful, revealing the rot that had been festering in my family for years. What happened next after that night was even worse than the initial humiliation. I'm going to tell you the full, unedited truth about how one night's disaster led to me confronting the deepest betrayals in my life and ultimately finding my own way out. Please let me know where you're watching from in the comments below. I'd love to see. And if you've ever felt like your own family turned on you or twisted the truth to make you look bad, please hit that like button because you are definitely not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, remember to subscribe. The night everything seemed to fall apart started like any other attempt I made back then to feel normal, to feel young and carefree, despite the constant weight of my family's expectations and criticisms pressing down on me. I was 26. I had a job, an apartment, friends, all the trappings of an independent adult life, but internally, I was still living under the shadow of my parents' and older brother's judgment. They had a way of making me feel perpetually 15, incapable, and fundamentally flawed. Every achievement was downplayed, every mistake magnified. My relationship with them felt less like familial love and more like a continuous performance review where I was always failing to meet the arbitrary criteria. My brother, Daniel, was their golden child. He was 2 years older than me, successful in their eyes, and perfectly mirrored their traditional values. He never questioned their authority, never rocked the boat. I, on the other hand, asked too many questions, felt things too deeply, and dared to have opinions that differed from theirs. This made me the black sheep, the problem child, even into adulthood. My parents, especially my mother, relied heavily on Daniel for emotional support and practical help. While I was often kept at a distance, my offers of help sometimes, even politely or not so politely, refused, only for them to turn around and complain I wasn't supportive enough. It was a classic double-bind and no-win situation designed, it seemed, to keep me off balance and feeling guilty. The night in question, I was out with my friend, Chloe. We decided to check out a new bar downtown. It was a bit loud, a bit crowded, not really my usual scene, but I was trying to push myself to break out of the inertia the family dynamics often trap me in. I hadn't had much to drink, maybe 2 cocktails over a couple of hours, but I was already feeling overwhelmed by the noise and the press of people. I have always been sensitive to sensory input, something my family dismissed as being too delicate or making excuses. Chloe had gone to the bar to get us another round, and I was standing near the edge of the dance floor, trying not to get bumped, when a guy stumbled hard into me, spilling his drink all down my front. It wasn't just a little splash, it was a full glass, sticky and cold, soaking my shirt. It startled me, and my immediate reaction, unfortunately, was one of frustration and a choked-back cry. It wasn't just about the spilled drink. It was the culmination of a stressful week, the sensory overload, and that constant feeling of being slightly off-kilter that living under my family's scrutiny instilled in me. I probably didn't handle it perfectly. Instead of just wiping it off and moving on, I let out a small, frustrated noise, something like a whimper mixed with a groan. The guy mumbled a hurried apology and disappeared back into the crowd before I could even fully process what had happened. Chloe came back a moment later, saw my soaked shirt, and her eyes widened. "Oh my God, Megan, are you okay?" she asked, instantly concerned. I felt a wave of embarrassment wash over me. I hated making a scene, but the stickiness and the general feeling of being violated by the spilled drink, combined with my already fragile emotional state, just tipped me over. A few people nearby were looking. I could feel my face getting hot.
Yeah,
"I just need to go to the restroom," I mumbled, trying to gather myself. I felt a bit shaky, like I might cry, which was mortifying. Chloe offered to come with me, but I just wanted a moment alone to breathe and clean up. As I walked towards the back of the bar, past the edge of the dance floor, I guess I still looked visibly upset. My shoulders were slumped, and I was probably wiping futilely at my wet shirt. That's when one of the bouncers, a huge guy standing near the door leading to the restrooms, stopped me. "Hey, are you alright, miss?" he asked, his voice gruff but not unkind. I just nodded, trying to keep my composure. Yeah, just spilled a drink on myself. He looked at me for a moment, really looked at me, and his expression shifted from standard bouncer vigilance to something else, something like recognition mixed with confusion. He was a big man, broad-shouldered, with short, dark hair and serious eyes. He couldn't have been more than a few years older than me. Wait a minute, he said, frowning slightly. Do I know you? My heart sank a little. The last thing I wanted was to run into someone I knew while looking like a drowned rat and feeling like I was about to have a breakdown in a bar restroom. I don't think so, I replied, trying to move past him. He didn't budge. He kept staring at my face. Megan, he said, slowly, uncertainty in his voice, but also a growing certainty in his eyes. Megan Miller? My full maiden name. Only family or people who knew my family well would know that. My stomach clenched. I hadn't used that name professionally or socially in years, not since college really, preferring just my first and last name, which were common enough. Yes, I said cautiously. Who was this giant man? He broke into a hesitant, almost shy smile, completely changing his face.
Wow.
Megan.
It's
Alex. Alex Johnson. Aunt Carol and Uncle Mark's son? Alex. My cousin Alex. I hadn't seen Alex in probably 15 years, maybe more. Our families weren't particularly close geographically, and my branch of the family tended to isolate themselves, only showing up for the most obligatory of holiday gatherings, and even then, interactions felt strained. I remembered Alex as a skinny, quiet kid who was always sketching in a notebook. This massive man in a bouncer uniform was almost unrecognizable. Alex? Oh my God, I stammered, genuinely shocked.
Wow, you
got big. It was probably the most articulate thing I could manage at that moment. He chuckled, a deep rumble in his chest. Yeah, well, gotta be able to handle myself in this job. He paused, his smile fading as he looked at me again, really taking in my state. But, are you really okay? You look pretty shaken up. Meeting a long-lost cousin while covered in a sticky drink and trying not to cry in a bar was not exactly how I envisioned a family reunion. I suddenly felt the full weight of the situation, the absurdity of it, and the underlying sadness of being so disconnected from my extended family that I didn't even recognize my own cousin. Yeah, I'm okay, I repeated, trying to sound more convincing this time. Someone just spilled a drink on me. It's just a bad night, I guess. He looked thoughtful. Bad night, huh? Anything specific, or just generally? I hesitated. Could I talk to him? He was family, technically, but a stranger really. But there was something in his eyes that seemed genuinely concerned, a stark contrast to the usual dismissiveness I received from my immediate family.
just
Life, I said vaguely. Family stuff, mostly. It's complicated. He nodded slowly, leaning back slightly against the wall next to the restroom door. Tell me about it, he said quietly, a hint of understanding in his voice. Family can be a lot. We stood there for a moment, two strangers connected by blood, one in a bouncer uniform, the other covered in alcohol, in the noisy hallway of a busy bar. It was a bizarre tableau. Look, he said, straightening up. The restrooms are right there. Go clean up. If you want to talk for a minute when you come out, I'll still be here. Or not, totally up to you. A lifeline? From a bouncer cousin I hadn't seen in 15 years? It felt surreal. But the genuine offer, the lack of judgment in his tone, was incredibly appealing in that moment. Okay, I said, managing a small, grateful smile. Thanks, Alex. I went into the restroom. I cleaned myself up as best I could, splashed cold water on my face, and took a few deep breaths, trying to regain my composure. Looking in the mirror, I saw how pale I was, the stress etched around my eyes. This was the person my family always saw, or claimed to see, fragile, on the verge of tears, unstable. But that wasn't the whole story. That was the reaction to their treatment, not the inherent me. When I came out, Alex was still there. Chloe was standing a little ways off, looking worried, but she stayed back, giving us space. Better? Alex asked. A little, I admitted. Thanks. He gestured towards a quieter corner near the emergency exit, away from the main thoroughfare. Walk with me for a sec. We moved over there. The music was muffled, the crowd noise less intense. So, he began, looking out at the crowd through a side window. Megan Miller, bouncer duty reunion. Not exactly the family picnic, huh? I actually laughed a short, slightly hysterical sound. Definitely not. You mentioned family stuff, he said, turning back to me, his expression serious again. Everything all right with your parents? And Daniel? The casual mention of Daniel, the golden boy, twisted something in my gut. All right is a strong word, I said carefully. It's been difficult for a while. We don't really understand each other. He nodded, watching my face intently. Yeah, I get that. Uncle John and Aunt Sarah always seemed, well, a little different from the rest of the family.
More.
I don't know. Reserved? Critical? He said reserved and critical, but his tone implied a lot more. It was the first hint that maybe the toxicity wasn't just in my head or my unique experience. Maybe others saw it too, even from a distance. They have their way of seeing things, I said, choosing my words carefully. I didn't want to dump 15 years of family trauma on a cousin I hadn't seen since childhood, even if he was a bouncer. Look, Alex said, lowering his voice slightly. I don't know the details. We didn't see you guys much, but I always got the sense there was tension, and Uncle John and Aunt Sarah could be intense, especially about appearances. Appearances. That was it exactly. My entire life felt like a performance for them, a desperate attempt to maintain the appearance of a perfect, harmonious family, even if it meant sweeping everything real and messy under the rug. My struggles, my feelings, my opinions, they were all messy. They care a lot about what other people think. I agreed, understatement heavy in my voice. Yeah, he said, his eyes meeting mine. Listen, I'm sorry if this is out of line, but are you safe? Are you okay? Really? His direct question, devoid of judgment, cracked something open inside me. Tears welled up instantly, unexpected and overwhelming. I quickly turned away, trying to hide them. Hey, he said softly, his voice immediately gentler. He didn't touch me, just stood close by, a silent, solid presence. It's okay. You don't have to put on a brave face for me. I fumbled for a tissue, wiping furiously at my eyes. I'm safe, I managed to say, my voice thick. Just tired. Really tired of it all. I hear you, he said. Family ties can be the heaviest ones. He was quiet for a moment, letting me compose myself. Look, I'm working tonight, obviously. But if you ever need to talk or just need someone to listen who isn't, here's my number. He pulled out his phone with one hand, quickly typed something, and held it out to me. Put a number in. I'll send you a text so you have mine. Hesitantly, I took his phone. It felt like a massive gesture of unexpected kindness. I typed my number in and handed it back. A second later, my own phone buzzed with a text. Hey Megan, it's Alex. Bouncer cousin. Stay safe. Thank you, Alex, I said, genuinely grateful. That means a lot. Anytime, he said, giving me a small, kind smile. Seriously. It's tough out there sometimes, even tougher when it's the people who are supposed to have your back. Now, he clapped his hands together quietly, his bouncer persona returning slightly. Go back to your friend. Try to have a better night. And text me if you need anything. I nodded, feeling a strange mix of relief, shock, and sadness. I thanked him again and walked back towards Chloe, who immediately enveloped me in a hug. What was that all about? She whispered. That, I said, my voice still a little shaky, was my cousin Alex. I haven't seen him in 15 years. Chloe pulled back, looking stunned. Your cousin? The bouncer? Yep, I said, a weak smile on my face. Small world. Or maybe just a big family. I don't know very well. The encounter with Alex was a strange coda to the night. It didn't fix anything, not immediately. I still felt shaky, the spilled drink a literal and metaphorical stain on my attempt at normalcy. Chloe and I left the bar soon after. The energy for being out had completely dissipated. But the conversation with Alex, brief as it was, stayed with me. It was a crack in the narrative my family had built. He had acknowledged their critical nature, hinted at understanding the tension, and offered help without asking for anything in return. It was the first time in a long time a family member hadn't immediately defaulted to blaming me or dismissing my feelings. The real disaster, the one that Alex's unexpected appearance only foreshadowed, began the next day. I woke up feeling emotionally drained and physically sore from the stress. I had barely processed the encounter with Alex when my phone started buzzing incessantly. It was my mother. I dreaded answering her calls at the best of times. Calls after I had been out socially were always the worst. They were usually fishing expeditions for any perceived misstep she could seize upon. I finally answered, bracing myself. "Megan." "There you are," she exclaimed, her voice tight with feigned concern that didn't quite hide the underlying accusation. "Hi, Mom," I said, keeping my voice neutral. "Your father and I were so worried. Daniel told us what happened." "Daniel? How did Daniel know?" My blood ran cold. I hadn't spoken to Daniel, hadn't even texted him. "Daniel?" I asked, confused. "How would Daniel know anything? He said one of his friends was at that establishment you were at last night." My mother said, the word establishment dripping with disapproval. "And they saw you being escorted out by the bouncers." "What on earth were you doing, Megan?" "Escorted out? By the bouncers?" My mind reeled. I hadn't been escorted out by bouncers. I had been upset. Yes, I'd gone to the restroom. Yes, and I'd spoken to Alex, who was a bouncer. Yes, but I hadn't been kicked out. "Mom, that's not what happened," I said, trying to stay calm, but my voice was already starting to shake with indignation. "Someone spilled a drink on me. I got upset, and I went to the restroom. I talked to one of the bouncers for a minute because he's actually my cousin, Alex Johnson, Aunt Carol's son, but I wasn't escorted out." My mother's response was immediate and dismissive. "Oh, Megan, always an excuse. An incident involving bouncers is an incident involving bouncers. Daniel's friend said you were visibly distressed, causing a scene. Honestly, Megan, can't you just behave yourself? Your father is furious. Causing a scene? Visibly distressed?" Yes, I was distressed, but I wasn't causing a scene. I was trying to avoid one. And the only incident with a bouncer was a conversation where he offered help. The way this was being framed was sickeningly familiar. My family had a talent for taking a small, neutral, or even unfortunate event and twisting it into evidence of my perceived instability or bad character. I wasn't causing a scene, I insisted, raising my voice despite my efforts not to. I was upset because I was soaked in someone's drink, and then I ran into a cousin I haven't seen in years. Running into family or not, if you're acting in a manner that gets the attention of the bouncers, there is clearly a problem, Megan, my mother said, her voice hardening. Perhaps you were drinking too much? Were you with that Chloe girl again? She's a bad influence, always dragging you to these places. The familiar accusations piled on. Drinking too much, false. Bad friends, false. Chloe was wonderful and supportive, my own behavior being the root cause. Always their go-to. The incident with the spilled drink and meeting Alex had been warped into a story of me being drunk and disorderly, needing to be removed from a bar. The speed and efficiency with which this narrative had been constructed and delivered were chilling. Daniel, the golden child, reporting back twisted information to gain favor, and my parents instantly believing it, adding their own layers of judgment. "I had 2 drinks, Mom," I said, feeling the familiar despair wash over me. This is ridiculous. Daniel's friend either misinterpreted what they saw, or they're making it up. I wasn't kicked out. Well, Daniel's friend's account sounds a lot more plausible than your usual dramatics, Megan, my mother retorted, and the mask of feigned concern dropped completely, revealing the cold, hard judgment beneath. "Frankly, your father and I are worried about you. This sounds like exactly the kind of behavior we've tried to warn you about. You need to be more careful about the company you keep and the situations you put yourself in. It reflects poorly on all of us. And there it was. It always came back to how my actions reflected on them. My feelings, my safety, my truth. None of it mattered as much as maintaining the family's spotless image. The conversation spiraled downwards. I tried to explain again, to defend myself, to introduce the detail about Alex being my cousin and how strange the encounter was, hoping the sheer oddness of it would lend credibility to my story. But every attempt was met with skepticism, dismissal, or further accusations. Alex Johnson? Really, Megan? You expect us to believe you just happened to run into a cousin you haven't seen in years, who happens to be a bouncer at this place, just as you were supposedly having this incident? My father scoffed when I was put on speakerphone. His tone was full of disbelief, as if I had concocted an elaborate lie.
Yes.
That's exactly what happened. I practically shouted, tears of frustration streaming down my face now. It was a total coincidence, and he saw I was upset and offered help. Or, my mother cut in smoothly, he saw you being removed for disruptive behavior and decided to intervene because your family, trying to smooth things over. Which is hardly better, Megan. It just means you were so out of control, family had to step in. I hung up. I couldn't take it anymore. The sheer injustice of it, the way they twisted everything, the complete lack of trust or empathy. They preferred to believe a second-hand, distorted account from Daniel's friend over my own words. It wasn't just about this one night. It was about a lifetime of feeling unheard, misunderstood, and unfairly judged. Hanging up the phone felt like cutting a cord, albeit a painful one. I sat there, sobbing, feeling utterly alone and betrayed. My own family, my parents, my brother. They had taken a moment of vulnerability and awkwardness and turned it into a weapon to confirm their existing negative narrative about me. Chloe came over later that day. I told her everything that had happened, the spilled drink, meeting Alex, and the horrific phone call with my parents. She was horrified.
That's
insane, Megan, she said, hugging me tight. They would rather believe some random person they don't know than you? Their own daughter? That's how it's always been, Chloe, I said, my voice hoarse. They have their idea of who I am, unstable, unreliable, dramatic, and everything I do is filtered through that lens. Anything that doesn't fit is ignored, and anything that can be twisted to fit is used against me. The next few days were a blur of silent treatment from my family, followed by emails that were superficially concerned but deeply critical, advising me to reflect on my behavior and seek help for my issues. They wouldn't even engage with my version of events. The night out had become a symbol, proof of my supposed flaws, legitimizing their control and criticism in their own minds. I felt a profound sense of loss. It wasn't just losing a night out or having a public humiliation imagined by my family. It was losing the hope, faint as it had become, that they would ever see me, the real me, and accept me. The betrayal by Daniel, sharing a distorted story, hurt deeply. It felt like a deliberate act to undermine me in our parents' eyes, solidifying his position as the good child at my expense. I didn't reach out to Alex immediately. I felt too ashamed, too raw. But a few days later, I got another text from him. Hey, just checking in. Everything okay? Seeing his name, the reminder of that strange, unexpected connection, gave me a small surge of courage. I typed back. Actually, not really. The night out drama got back to my parents in a really twisted way, and it's caused a huge fight. He replied almost instantly.
Oh.
Want to talk about it? We ended up talking on the phone that night. I told him the whole story, the way my parents and Daniel had blown the incident out of proportion, claimed I was kicked out, and used it to reinforce their negative view of me. I told him about the conversation, their disbelief about him being my cousin, the accusations. Alex listened patiently. He didn't interrupt, didn't offer platitudes. When I finished, there was a long silence. Wow, Megan, he said finally, his voice quiet.
That's a lot.
I'm so sorry you're dealing with that. The worst part is they don't believe me, I said, my voice breaking again. They think I was drunk and disorderly and kicked out, and that I'm lying about everything else. Even about meeting you.
But
I was there, Alex said, sounding genuinely confused. I saw you. You were upset. Yeah, but you weren't drunk, weren't being loud or aggressive. You just looked like you'd had a rough night and maybe needed a minute. I can vouch for that. His words were like a bomb. Validation. From a family member. It was a foreign but incredibly healing sensation. You do that? I asked, surprised. Of course I would, he said firmly. It's the truth. Why wouldn't I? Unless. Would them knowing I talked to you make things worse? I paused. Would it? Maybe. They had already dismissed the fact of his existence in the story. Maybe bringing him into it would just give them another angle for attack, claiming I was colluding with another family member against them, or that Alex was just covering for me. The complexity of their manipulation was exhausting. I don't know, I admitted. Maybe. They already didn't believe I ran into you by chance. They implied you might have intervened because I was being kicked out. Alex swore softly under his breath.
That's
twisted. Wow, he was quiet for a moment. Okay. Well, the offer stands. If you think it would help, I can tell them exactly what I saw or didn't see. I don't have a horse in this race, Megan. I just saw my cousin looking distressed and offered to make sure she was okay. That's it. Knowing I had that option, that tangible proof that someone else in the family sphere saw things differently, felt incredibly empowering. It chipped away at the isolation their narrative always tried to impose on me. But more than that, Alex's willingness to stand by the truth, even in the face of potential family drama, was a powerful lesson. It showed me what healthy familial connection could look like, something I hadn't experienced consistently before. The conversation with Alex gave me the strength I needed to shift my approach. I had spent years desperately trying to get my parents and Daniel to understand me, to see my perspective, to validate my feelings. I had pleaded, explained, defended, cried, and gotten angry, all to no avail. They were locked into their perception, and every interaction reinforced it. Talking to Alex made me realize that maybe they weren't capable of seeing the truth, or perhaps they actively chose not to because their narrative served them in some way. It maintained their sense of control, justified their behavior, or simply fit their worldview. The idea that I didn't need their validation, that my truth was valid even if they denied it, began to take root. Over the next few weeks, the pressure from my parents continued in waves, sometimes cold silence, sometimes emails filled with thinly veiled accusations and concern. I decided to respond differently. Instead of defending myself or trying to explain, I started setting boundaries. I wouldn't engage with their accusations about the night out. If they brought it up, I would simply state, I've told you what happened, and I'm not discussing it further. This was incredibly difficult at first. My instinct was to argue, to prove them wrong. But I saw how arguing only drew me deeper into their manipulative cycle. My words were never going to be heard. They would only be used against me. When they criticized my friends, my job, my choices, I started responding with variations of, that's my decision, or I'm happy with my life, or simply, I'm not going to listen to this. It felt awkward, confrontational, and terrifying. I had been conditioned for so long to seek their approval, to mold myself into what they wanted, that asserting my autonomy felt like a rebellion of seismic proportions. Predictably, they reacted negatively. They accused me of being disrespectful, stubborn, and cold. My mother cried, saying I was breaking her heart. My father grew angry, demanding I listen to them as my parents. Daniel sent texts saying I was being unreasonable and selfish and needed to apologize for the way I'd behaved. It was a test and it was painful. Every boundary I set was met with resistance, pushing back against the invisible walls I was trying to build for my own protection. The emotional toll was immense. There were days I felt crushed by the weight of their disapproval, questioning everything about myself. Was I really the problematic person they saw? Was I just being difficult? But then I would remember the conversation with Alex. His simple statement, I can vouch for that, his willingness to see the truth, even as family. It was a small anchor in a sea of gaslighting. I also leaned heavily on Chloe, who reminded me of my strengths, my kindness, and the reality of the situation. She saw the abuse, the manipulation, and her external perspective was invaluable. I realized the climax of this wasn't going to be a single explosive argument where everyone suddenly saw the light. It was a slower process, a gradual redefinition of the relationship, initiated by me. The night out wasn't the cause of the problem. It was the catalyst that forced me to confront the long-standing issues and decide I couldn't live like that anymore. The confrontation, when it came more formally, wasn't in a bar, but over a strained family dinner several months later, after a period of low contact that I had initiated. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. My parents made polite, strained conversation, occasionally taking passive-aggressive jabs disguised as concern. Daniel was there, watchful and silent, clearly aligned with our parents. At one point, my mother brought up the night out again, circling back to it despite my previous refusal to discuss it. "It's just, Megan, we still don't understand why you were so upset that night. It wasn't just the drink spill, was it? There must be something more going on." It was phrased as a question, but the implication was clear. I was unstable, and the drink spill was just a symptom of some deeper, unnamed problem within me. This time, instead of defending myself, I took a deep breath and looked directly at her. "Mom," I said, my voice steady despite my heart pounding. "We are not discussing that night. I was upset because I was upset. That's allowed. What I am willing to discuss is how every time something happens in my life, you and Dad and Daniel immediately jump to the worst possible conclusion about me. You didn't believe me when I told you what happened, and you used it to criticize me and question my character. That's the real problem here." Silence fell over the table, heavy and suffocating. My father's face grew red. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. My mother looked genuinely shocked that I was turning the accusation back on them and doing it so directly at the dinner table. "Megan, that is incredibly disrespectful," my father blustered.
We were worried about you.
Any parent would be concerned if their daughter was being escorted out of a bar. "I wasn't escorted out," I repeated, my voice rising slightly, but I held on to my composure. "And you weren't worried. You were looking for something to use against me. You've always done this. You dismiss my feelings, question my judgment, and twist things to make me look bad. You did it with my first job, with my choice of college major, with every boyfriend I ever had, and now with simply having a bad moment on a night out." "That is not true," my mother cried, reaching for my father's hand as if for support against my attack. "It is true," I insisted, the words flowing now, years of suppressed frustration finally finding voice. "You hold me to impossible standards, you compare me constantly to Daniel, who can do no wrong in your eyes, and you make me feel like I'm a constant disappointment. That night at the bar? It wasn't just about the drink. It was about feeling overwhelmed and stressed, and knowing that no matter what happened, if it wasn't perfect, you would find a way to make it my fault." Daniel finally spoke up, his voice cold. "Megan, you're being overly dramatic. They were just trying to help. You're always so sensitive." "See," I said, turning to Daniel. "That's exactly what I mean. Overly dramatic, too sensitive, those are your go-to phrases to dismiss my feelings whenever they're inconvenient for you. You reported a distorted version of events to Mom and Dad, knowing it would cause problems for me. Why, Daniel? To make yourself look better?" Daniel's face flushed, but he didn't answer directly. My parents jumped in to defend him, steering the conversation back to my perceived faults. It was the familiar dance, but this time, I wasn't dancing along. "I'm not doing this anymore," I said, pushing my chair back slightly. "I'm not going to keep trying to convince you to see me or to validate my experience. I know my truth. I know what happened that night, and I know how you reacted and how you've always reacted. And it's not healthy for me." I stood up. My parents looked stunned, then angry. "Megan, where are you going?" my father demanded. "I'm going home," I said. "I can't keep having these conversations where I'm constantly on trial. If you ever want to have a relationship with me where you treat me with respect, listen to me, and trust my word, then I'm open to that. but I'm not going to accept this anymore. I walked out of the dining room, out of their house. It was terrifying, liberating, and heartbreaking all at once. The dinner wasn't a neat resolution. There were no apologies, no sudden epiphanies from their side. But it was a crucial turning point for me. I had spoken my truth, not in an attempt to gain their approval, but simply to assert it and set my boundaries. The immediate aftermath was predictable. More angry texts and emails, threats of cutting me off financially, though I was already independent, and the silent treatment. But I held firm. I leaned on Chloe and other supportive friends. I even texted Alex, telling him about the confrontation. "That took huge guts, Megan," he replied. "Seriously. Proud of you for standing up for yourself." His simple words, again, meant the world. He wasn't entangled in the daily mess of my immediate family dynamics, but he saw the core of the issue, standing up for oneself against unfairness. The resolution of this story isn't a perfect, Hallmark movie ending. My relationship with my parents and Daniel is forever changed. We are low contact. We exchange polite texts on holidays, but the closeness, the illusion of a functional family I once longed for, is gone. And that's okay. It's sad, but it's okay. I learned that I don't need their validation to know my worth or my truth. I learned that setting boundaries, even with family, is essential for self-preservation, not an act of selfishness. I learned that sometimes the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally are the ones who hurt you the most, often because of their own issues and insecurities. Meeting Alex, the bouncer cousin, was a strange, unexpected gift in the middle of the storm. He was a reminder that not all family dynamics are toxic, that kindness and validation can come from unexpected places, and that there are people who will see your truth even when those closest to you refuse to. He remains a distant but friendly presence, occasionally checking in, a quiet support that means more than he probably knows. The night out wasn't a disaster because I spilled a drink or got upset. It was a disaster because it exposed the deep-seated issues in my family and how they weaponized my vulnerabilities. But navigating the aftermath, confronting the betrayal, and setting boundaries, that's where my growth happened. It was messy, painful, and lonely at times, but it led me to a stronger, more authentic version of myself. I lost the idealized version of my family, but I found myself. And that, ultimately, was a trade worth making. Thank you for listening to my story. It was hard to share, but I believe in the power of speaking our truth. If anything in my experience resonated with you, maybe the feeling of being misunderstood, the pain of family betrayal, or the struggle to set boundaries, please let me know in the comments below. Sharing our experiences can help us feel less alone. If this story touched you, please hit that like button. And if you want to hear more stories about navigating difficult relationships and finding your voice, don't forget to subscribe. Thank you again for being here. Remember to speak your truth, always.